Hey YNR fans! Welcome to YNR Trends, your young and the restless updates, shocking spoilers, and all the drama. So grab your coffee, hit that subscribe button, and let's dive right into Genoa City's hottest gossip. Nick never thought he'd live to see the day when his world would collapse in a matter of minutes, but that's exactly what happened the moment he stumbled into Crimson Lights after getting a frantic call. His heart pounded in his chest as he pushed open the door, his senses heightened, his instincts screaming that something was terribly wrong. The smell of coffee and pastries was still in the air, but there was another odor too, sharp and metallic, one that immediately twisted his gut. Then he saw it, his son, Noah, lying motionless on the floor in the back corner, surrounded by a dark pool of blood that seemed to grow larger by the second. Nick's knees nearly buckled at the sight, his throat tightening as panic seized him. The image of Noah's pale face, his body sprawled out as if life had already left him, would be forever burned into his memory. "Noah!" Nick's voice cracked, filled with raw desperation, echoing through the silent cafe as he dropped to his knees beside his boy. His trembling hands hovered for a second, afraid of what he might feel, but then instinct forced him into action. He pressed his fingers against Noah's neck, praying with every fiber of his being to feel a pulse. When a faint but steady beat thumped back, Nick exhaled shakily, his body flooded with relief and terror at once. Noah was alive, but barely. His skin was clammy, his lips tinged with blue, and the blood soaking through his shirt was horrifying. Nick's hands were covered in it now, sticky and warm, a reminder of how close his son was to slipping away. He grabbed a dish towel from the counter and pressed it against the wound, his voice breaking as he begged his son to hold on. "Stay with me, buddy. You hear me? Don't you leave me." For a moment, Nick could hardly think. His mind spun with flashes of Noah as a little boy, running through the ranch, his smile wide and innocent, and then the young man he had become, struggling to find his way but always with a good heart. The thought of losing him now was unbearable. Someone must have heard Nick's cries, because suddenly Sharon appeared from the hallway, her face pale with shock. The sound that came from her throat was almost inhuman as she rushed to Noah's side, her hands shaking. "Oh my God, what happened?" she gasped, dropping to her knees across from Nick. But there wasn't time for answers. Nick barked at her to call 911, his voice urgent, almost feral. Sharon's hands fumbled with her phone, her tears blurring her vision as she shouted into the receiver, giving the operator their location. Nick kept the pressure steady on Noah's wound, praying the ambulance would come fast enough. Time seemed to slow, each second dragging like an eternity. He whispered to his son, trying to keep him tethered to consciousness, but Noah's eyelids fluttered weakly, his breathing shallow. Fear gripped Nick's chest so tightly he thought he might suffocate. When the paramedics finally burst through the door, it felt like a lifeline. They took over with swift precision, checking vitals, lifting Noah onto a stretcher. Nick tried to follow, but they told him to give space. His entire body shook as he stumbled outside, Sharon at his side, both of them running to keep up with the gurney as it was wheeled into the ambulance. The sight of Noah being loaded in, oxygen mask covering his face, for already in place, made Nick feel utterly helpless. He climbed inside without hesitation, clutching his son's hand the entire ride to Memorial Hospital, silently pleading with God, with anyone who would listen, not to take his boy away. The sirens wailed, the city lights blurred past, but all Nick could hear was the fragile rhythm of Noah's breathing and the pounding of his own heart. At the hospital, chaos ensued the moment they arrived. Nurses and doctors swarmed Noah, whisking him away toward trauma care. Nick tried to follow, but a nurse stopped him at the doors, promising they would do everything they could. He stood frozen, his hands still stained with Noah's blood, his chest heaving. Sharon caught up to him, clutching his arm for support, her tears soaking her cheeks. Together they collapsed into the waiting area, the sterile walls pressing in on them as dread filled the air. Nick couldn't sit still. He paced back and forth, running a hand through his hair, anger mixing with fear. Who could have done this to Noah? Why? His mind raced with suspects, with enemies who might have wanted to hurt him, but Noah wasn't the type to make those kinds of enemies. Or was he? Nick realized with a cold shiver that maybe he didn't know everything his son had been tangled up in. Hours felt like years, but eventually the doctor emerged, his face serious but calm. "He's stable for now," he said, explaining that Noah had lost a lot of blood but they had managed to stop the bleeding. The wound wasn't fatal as long as infection didn't set in, and with rest and care, he should recover. Nick's knees nearly gave out with relief. He hugged Sharon tightly, both of them crying openly, clinging to the hope that Noah would survive this nightmare. But as the relief washed over him, another wave came crashing in, the need for answers. Whoever had done this to his son was still out there, and Nick wouldn't rest until he found out who. Detective Chance Chancellor arrived not long after, his expression grave as he took in the scene. He asked Nick and Sharon to recount everything, but there was little they could say. Nick had found Noah already bleeding, unconscious. Sharon had no idea how it happened. Chance promised he'd get to the bottom of it, but Nick's patience was thin. His protective instincts roared to life. This was his son, his flesh and blood, and someone had tried to kill him. Whoever was responsible wouldn't get away with it. As he stared through the window at Noah lying pale and weak in the hospital bed, Nick vowed to himself that he would uncover the truth, no matter what it cost him. But the truth, when it finally came out, was more shocking than anything he could have imagined. Chance worked quickly, reviewing surveillance footage from the cafe and questioning anyone who had been nearby. At first, the cameras appeared to show nothing suspicious, until Chance noticed a shadowy figure slipping into the back hallway just minutes before Nick found Noah. The image was grainy, but as they enhanced it, the identity became clearer. When Nick saw the footage, his breath caught in his throat. He knew that face, and the realization hit him like a blow to the chest. The mysterious attacker who had nearly killed his son wasn't some stranger. It was someone connected to their lives, someone they all trusted. Nick's rage boiled over. He couldn't comprehend how this person, someone who had once broken bread with their family, who had smiled at Noah, could turn around and do something so monstrous. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. Sharon covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror as the pieces clicked into place. The shock of knowing the attacker wasn't an outsider but one of their own made the room spin. It wasn't just about Noah anymore, it was about trust shattered, about the entire Newman family being thrust into danger once again. Nick clenched his fists, his voice low and dangerous as he told Chance, "Find them. Bring them to me. Because I swear to God, if they even think about finishing what they started, they'll have to go through me first." The scene begins not with a scream, but with a silence so profound it is itself a sound. The opulent, modern interior of the Newman penthouse, a space usually resonating with the echoes of corporate machinations and familial tension, is preternaturally still. It is a sanctuary of wealth and power, all cool marble, sharp angles, and priceless art, a stage set for a drama of the elite. Yet, as Nick Newman crosses the threshold, the air changes. It becomes thick, heavy, charged with an invisible horror that pricks at the most primal instincts. The journey from the doorway into the living area is a slow-motion plunge into a nightmare. It is the dissonance that strikes first, the serene, ordered perfection of the room violently contradicted by the dark, glistening stain seeping into the pale rug. And at the center of this grotesque tableau lies Noah, his son, motionless, a fallen figure in a pool of blood that seems, in that first heart-stopping second, to be everywhere. The initial shock is a physical blow, a vacuum that sucks all the air from Nick's lungs and all the reason from his mind. His world, so often defined by boardroom bowels and complex romantic entanglements, collapses into the single, horrifying point. This is not a business rival to be outmaneuvered or a lover's quarrel to be resolved. This is the ultimate violation, an act of violence against his child, and it reduces the powerful, often volatile Nick Newman to a state of pure, unadulterated terror. His reaction is not one of a television character following a script, but something far more visceral and authentic. There is a frozen moment of denial, a desperate hope that his eyes are betraying him, that this is some cruel trick of the light. But the coppery tang of blood hitting his nostrils shatters that illusion instantly. The cry that escapes him is raw, guttural, stripped of all social pretense, a father's anguished roar at the sight of his wounded cub. The subsequent moments are a blur of frantic, desperate action. The phone is in his hand, his fingers fumbling as he barks the address to 911, his voice a strained instrument cracking under pressure. Every second spent waiting for the emergency services to arrive is an eternity of hell. He drops to his knees beside Noah, the plush carpet soaking through his trousers, a sensation he barely registers. His hands hover over his son's body, trembling, afraid to touch, to cause more harm, yet desperate to offer some form of comfort, to feel the faintest whisper of life. He is whispering Noah's name, a mantra, a prayer, pleading with him to hold on, to not let go. The blood is a terrifying reality, its volume speaking to the severity of the wound, its stillness suggesting precious time has already been lost. In this chaos, Nick's mind, usually so sharp and strategic, is a scrambled mess of fear and a dawning, volcanic rage. Who could have done this? Why? The questions are a frantic drumbeat in his skull, but they are secondary to the overwhelming need for his son to survive. This scene is the brilliant, agonizing culmination of a long-simmering mystery, the point where a slow-burning fuse reaches its powder keg. For weeks, perhaps months, the residents of Genoa City, and the audience along with them, have been aware of a shadowy threat. There have been hints, subtle manipulations, a sense of being watched, of small things being ever so slightly out of place. The attacker was a specter, a faceless source of dread whose motives were obscured and whose identity was a puzzle box of red herrings and potential suspects. The narrative function of this prolonged mystery is not merely to create suspense, but to embed a deep-seated paranoia into the fabric of the show. Every character with a secret, every figure with a grudge, was cast under a veil of suspicion. The audience became detectives, piecing together clues, theorizing in the spaces between episodes. This investment makes the payoff not just a revelation, but an event. The exposure of the attacker, therefore, is not simply a plot point, it is the emotional and psychological core of the shock. The identity of the assailant is everything. It determines whether the act is one of random, senseless violence, which, while horrifying, is a simpler wound to process, or a calculated betrayal, which cuts infinitely deeper. When the truth is revealed, and it is someone known, someone trusted, perhaps even someone loved, the violence against Noah transforms into something more complex and insidious. It becomes a violation of trust on a monumental scale. The shock for Nick is then twofold, the immediate horror of his son's condition, and the subsequent, soul-crushing realization of the perpetrator's identity. The pool of blood is not just evidence of a physical attack, it becomes a symbol of poisoned relationships and shattered illusions. Consider the profound difference in impact depending on who the exposed attacker is. If it is a known enemy, a business rival like Adam Newman, Nick's own brother, the event becomes a catastrophic escalation of their long-standing war. The familial conflict, usually fought with stalks, mergers, and verbal barbs, has now crossed a previously unthinkable line into literal bloodshed. The shock is coupled with a grim confirmation of Nick's darkest fears about his brother's capacity for darkness. The rage is direct, focused, and terrible. If, however, the attacker is revealed to be someone like Sharon, Noah's own mother, the shock transcends mere plot and becomes Shakespearean in its tragedy. The very source of Noah's life would have become the instrument of his near death. The psychological fallout for every character involved would be cataclysmic, a wound that could never truly heal. Alternatively, if the assailant is a lover, a friend, or a seemingly benign figure with a hidden, pathological grudge, the shock is rooted in the terror of the unknown, the realization that danger was wearing a friendly face all along. This plays on a universal fear, making the narrative all the more potent. In the aftermath of the discovery, as the paramedics swarm the penthouse and Noah is rushed to the hospital, Nick is left in the devastating quiet of the crime scene. The blood on the floor is now a crime scene marker. The silence is no longer empty but filled with the ghost of the violence that occurred. This is where the shock begins to calcify into something else, a cold, determined fury. The initial paralysis gives way to a single-minded purpose: find who did this and make them pay. For a character like Nick, who defines himself through his role as a protector of his family, this attack is the ultimate failure. He was not there to prevent it. This guilt will fuel his every action moving forward, likely leading him down a dark path of vengeance, blurring the lines between justice and revenge, and forcing him to confront the darkness within himself that he has always struggled to keep in check. The brilliance of this narrative construct lies in its ripple effect. The shockwave emanating from that pool of blood touches every corner of Genoa City. Victoria and Victor Newman are immediately drawn into the maelstrom, their own familial loyalties and capacities for ruthlessness brought to the fore. The Newman family, a dynasty built on power and control, is shown to be ultimately vulnerable to the most human of tragedies. Other families, the Abbotts, the Winters, are forced to choose sides, to examine their own relationships, and to confront the unsettling reality that a predator walks among them. The community is collectively traumatized, its sense of security shattered. Furthermore, the exposure of the attacker does not end the story, it begins an entirely new, and perhaps even more compelling, chapter. The why becomes the new mystery. What drove this person to such a brutal extreme? Was it jealousy? A hidden past coming to light? A psychotic break? A misguided belief that they were acting for some greater good? The exploration of the attacker's motive is crucial to understanding the full weight of the event. A motive born of pure malice is one thing, but a motive born of twisted love, profound misunderstanding, or mental illness adds layers of tragic complexity that elevate the storyline from a simple whodunit to a nuanced exploration of human psychology and the causes of evil. For Noah, the victim, his journey is irrevocably altered. His survival is only the first step. He must now live with the physical and psychological scars of the attack. The trust he places in the world, in people, is broken. His story becomes one of recovery and trauma, a long and difficult road back to a normalcy that will forever be defined by this before and after. His relationships will be tested, his worldview permanently shaded. The innocent young man is gone, replaced by a survivor who has stared into the abyss. Ultimately, the scene of Nick finding Noah is a masterclass in soap opera storytelling because it takes a classic, almost primal fear, the safety of one's child, and elevates it to its most dramatic extreme. It is a perfectly constructed shock because its power is not in the blood itself, but in everything the blood represents: the end of innocence, the fragility of security, the depth of betrayal, and the terrifying unpredictability of human behavior. It is a catalyst that forces every character to reveal their true nature, for in the face of such raw, unspeakable horror, pretense falls away. Nick's journey from that moment forward is forever colored by the image of his son, lifeless on the floor. It is a stain that will not wash out, a memory that will haunt his waking hours and his dreams, a defining tragedy that proves that even in a world of unimaginable wealth and power, the things that truly matter can be taken away in a moment of violence, leaving behind nothing but silence and a pool of blood.